In the split second when chaos erupted around the Princess of Wales, one man made a decision that would define his entire career. As thousands of excited royal fans surged forward like a human tsunami, Detective Sergeant Michael Harrison didn't think about protocol, didn't consider the consequences, and didn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. He simply threw his body between the future queen and certain disaster. What happened next would be replayed on news channels around the world, analyzed by security experts, and remembered as one of the most dramatic moments in modern royal protection history. But for Michael Harrison, it was just another day doing what he had sworn to do: protect the royal family at any cost, even if that cost was his own life. This is the true story of a man who became a human shield, the princess who never forgot his sacrifice, and the moment that proved sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen not in war zones or burning buildings, but in the middle of a crowd of people who simply loved their royal family a little too much. Detective Sergeant Michael Harrison never imagined his life would revolve around protecting royalty when he first joined the Metropolitan Police 15 years ago. Growing up in a working-class family in Manchester, he had dreamed of becoming a police officer to help people in his community. His father worked in a factory, his mother cleaned offices at night, and the idea of rubbing shoulders with princes and princesses seemed as distant as reaching the moon. Michael's journey to the Royal Protection Unit began with a simple traffic stop that went horribly wrong. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in East London when he pulled over what appeared to be a routine speeding violation. The driver seemed nervous, fumbling with his license, and something in his eyes made Michael's instincts scream danger. When the man suddenly reached under his seat, Michael's years of training kicked in automatically. The struggle that followed lasted only 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The driver had pulled a knife, lunging at Michael through the car window. Without thinking, Michael grabbed the man's wrist, using his body weight to pin him against the steering wheel while radioing for backup. The knife blade stopped just inches from his chest, and Michael could smell the man's desperation and fear mixing with his own adrenaline. When backup arrived, they discovered the car was stolen and the man was wanted for armed robbery. Michael's quick thinking and willingness to put himself in danger had prevented what could have been a tragedy. The incident earned him a commendation for bravery, but more importantly, it caught the attention of someone very special. Chief Inspector Sarah Walsh had been watching the case from her office at Scotland Yard. She was responsible for recruiting officers for the Royal Protection Unit, and she had been looking for someone with Michael's particular combination of skills. He was brave but not reckless, observant but not paranoid, and most importantly, he had an instinct for reading people that couldn't be taught in any training program. The phone call came on a Thursday morning while Michael was finishing paperwork from his latest case. "Detective Harrison," the voice said, "this is Chief Inspector Walsh from Scotland Yard. I'd like to speak with you about a career opportunity that might interest you." Michael thought it was a prank at first. Scotland Yard didn't call ordinary police officers out of the blue. Fuck. But when he found himself sitting in a sterile conference room 3 days later, facing a panel of serious-looking officials, he realized this was very real indeed. "Your record speaks for itself, Detective Harrison," Chief Inspector Walsh began, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Excellent performance reviews, multiple commendations, and a particular talent for staying calm under pressure. We're looking for officers to join a very specialized unit." The interview process was unlike anything Michael had experienced. They asked him about his family, his hobbies, his political views, and even his thoughts on the monarchy. They wanted to know how he would react in hypothetical situations, testing his loyalty, his discretion, and his ability to make split-second decisions. "Tell me," one interviewer asked, "if you had to choose between following direct orders and protecting an innocent person, what would you do?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Protecting innocent people is why I became a police officer in the first place." That would always come first. The training that followed was intense beyond anything Michael had imagined. For 6 months, he learned advanced driving techniques, close protection procedures, and threat assessment. He studied the history of the royal family, memorizing faces of potential threats and understanding the complex web of relationships that surrounded the monarchy. But the most challenging part of the training wasn't physical or academic. It was learning to become invisible while being completely alert, to blend into the background while being ready to spring into action at any moment. Michael had to learn to read crowds like a book, spotting potential problems before they developed, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. His instructor, A gruff former military man named Sergeant Davies had been protecting royals for 20 years. The thing about this job, he told Michael during one particularly grueling training session, is that 99% of the time, nothing happens. But that 1% when everything goes wrong, you better be ready to give everything you've got. Michael's first assignment was protecting minor royals at charity events and public appearances. He learned to position himself strategically, always scanning crowds for unusual behavior, always ready to move. He discovered that royal protection was as much about reading people as it was about physical security. At his first major event, a garden party for a children's charity, Michael watched as the Duke of Gloucester moved through the crowd, shaking hands and making small talk. To the guests, it looked effortless and natural, but Michael could see the careful choreography behind it all, the way other protection officers moved like ghosts through the crowd, how every entrance and exit was monitored. During a break in the event, Sergeant Davies approached him. "You're doing well, Harrison. You've got good instincts. But remember, this job isn't just about protecting bodies. We're protecting an institution, a way of life that millions of people believe in." Those words stuck with Michael as his responsibilities gradually increased. He began working closer to senior royals, learning their habits, their preferences, and their individual security needs. Each royal required a different approach. Some were naturally cautious, while others seemed to forget they were targets simply by virtue of their birth. The breakthrough moment in Michael's career came during a visit by the Prince of Wales to a factory in Birmingham. Intelligence had suggested there might be protesters, but nothing specific. Michael was positioned near the main entrance when he noticed a man in the crowd who didn't fit. While everyone else was craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the prince, this man was watching the security team, studying their positions and movements. Michael quietly alerted his colleagues, and they were able to intercept the man before he could act. In his backpack, they found materials for making crude explosive devices. The man later confessed he had been planning to target the prince's convoy as it left the factory. The incident earned Michael recognition within the Royal Protection Unit, but more importantly, it demonstrated his value as a threat assessor. He had an uncanny ability to spot trouble before it developed, and his colleagues began to trust his instincts implicitly. When the opportunity came to join the protection detail for the Princess of Wales, Michael didn't hesitate to apply. Catherine had become one of the most popular members of the royal family, and protecting her required a special combination of skills. She was young, energetic, and genuinely loved meeting people, which created unique security challenges. The interview for the position was conducted by Deputy Chief Inspector James Morton, a man who had been protecting royals since before Michael was born. "The princess is different from other royals," Morton explained. "She genuinely cares about people, and that makes her want to get close to crowds, to really connect with the public. Your job will be to keep her safe while allowing her to be herself." Michael understood immediately. This wasn't just about creating a security bubble around the princess. It was about finding ways to let her natural warmth and accessibility shine through while ensuring that warmth didn't put her in danger. His first day on the princess's protection team was at a school opening in Yorkshire. Michael watched as Catherine moved through the crowd of children and parents, kneeling down to talk to nervous youngsters, listening intently to their teachers' explanations of new programs, genuinely engaging with everyone she met. But Michael was watching everything else too. He noted which parents seemed overly excited, which teachers were nervous about the royal visit, and how the children reacted to the sudden appearance of security officers. His job was to be invisible while seeing everything, to anticipate problems before they developed. As the months passed, Michael became an integral part of the princess's security team. He learned her habits, understood her preferences, and developed an almost intuitive sense of how she would react in different situations. Catherine was naturally warm and approachable, but she was also intelligent and observant. She quickly realized that Michael was different from other protection officers. During a quiet moment at a hospital visit, she turned to him and said, "You're the one who spots trouble before anyone else knows it's there, aren't you?" Michael was surprised by her directness. "I try to stay alert, Your Royal Highness." "I can tell," she replied with a smile. "I feel safer knowing you're watching out for everyone." That conversation marked the beginning of a professional relationship built on mutual respect. Catherine appreciated Michael's dedication and professionalism, while Michael admired her genuine commitment to her royal duties and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. The months of routine events and successful protection work were preparing Michael for something neither he nor anyone else could have anticipated. All his training, all his experience, and all his instincts were building toward a moment when everything he had learned would be tested in the most dramatic way possible. Little did Michael know that a routine visit to a shopping center in Leeds would become the defining moment of his career, and that his willingness to become a human shield would save the life of the future Queen of England. The morning of March 15th started like any other day for Michael Harrison. He arrived at Kensington Palace at 6:30, an hour before his shift officially began, as had become his habit. The early arrival gave him time to review the day's schedule, check overnight intelligence reports, and mentally prepare for whatever challenges might arise. Catherine's itinerary looked straightforward enough. She was scheduled to visit the Trinity Shopping Center in Leeds to officially open a new wing dedicated to supporting local businesses. The event was part of her ongoing campaign to promote economic development in communities outside London, a cause she had become increasingly passionate about. Michael spread the floor plans of the shopping center across his desk, studying every entrance, exit, and corridor. His colleague, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen, joined him with 2 cups of coffee and her own set of documents. "Intelligence says we should expect around 3,000 people," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Local police have been working crowd control for weeks, and the shopping center management has been coordinating with our advance team." Michael nodded, but something nagged at him. 3,000 people in an enclosed space, even one as large as a shopping center, created inherent risks. "Have we had a final walkthrough with the local team?" "Scheduled for this afternoon," Sarah replied. "But I know what you're thinking. Enclosed spaces with large crowds always make you nervous." Michael had developed a reputation within the protection unit for being especially cautious about indoor events with large crowds. Too many variables, too many things that could go wrong, and too many opportunities for situations to escalate quickly. The advance team's report, which arrived an hour later, didn't entirely ease Michael's concerns. The shopping center was modern and well-designed, with good sight lines and multiple exit routes. But the popularity of the princess meant that demand for the event had far exceeded expectations. Local officials estimated that crowd size might reach 4,000 people, significantly more than originally planned. Michael's phone rang as he was reviewing the updated crowd estimates. "Harrison here. Michael, it's Chief Inspector Morton. I've just gotten off a call with Leeds Police. They're requesting additional crowd control officers, and they want to move the walkabout portion of the visit to the outdoor plaza rather than inside the shopping center." "That sounds wise, sir. What's the princess's preference?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "She wants to keep the original plan. She feels that moving outdoors might disappoint people who specifically came to see the shopping center opening, and she's concerned about the weather forecast." Michael glanced out the window at the gray March sky. Rain was indeed predicted for the afternoon, which would make an outdoor event uncomfortable for both the princess and the crowd. But his instincts were telling him that weather discomfort was preferable to crowd management issues in an enclosed space. "Sir, with respect, I think we should strongly recommend the outdoor auction. Even with additional crowd control, those numbers in an enclosed space create significant risks." "I understand your concerns, Michael, and I share them. But the princess has made her position clear. Our job is to make her preferred plan work safely." After the call ended, Michael spent the rest of the morning refining contingency plans. He coordinated with the local police to establish additional crowd barriers, identified secondary evacuation routes, and arranged for extra medical personnel to be stationed discreetly throughout the shopping center. The drive to Leeds took 3 hours, and Michael used the time to continue studying the venue layout on his tablet. Catherine sat in the back of the armored vehicle, reviewing her speaking notes and briefing materials about the local businesses she would be meeting. She seemed relaxed and excited about the visit, which was typical for her approach to public engagements. "Michael," she said during a brief stop for fuel, "the advance team briefing mentioned some concerns about crowd size. Should I be worried?" "No, Your Royal Highness. We've planned for larger crowds than expected, and we have excellent support from local authorities. I just want to ensure we maintain good crowd flow throughout the event." Catherine nodded, but Michael could see she was processing his carefully diplomatic language. She had learned to read between the lines when security officers expressed concerns, understanding that they often understated potential issues to avoid unnecessary alarm. When they arrived at Trinity Shopping Center, Michael's first impression was positive. The local police had done an excellent job with crowd management, establishing orderly queues and clear sightlines. The shopping center itself was spacious and modern, with wide corridors and good natural lighting. But as Michael conducted a final walkthrough, he noticed that the crowds were already larger than expected, and the event wasn't scheduled to begin for another hour. People were arriving earlier than anticipated, and the excitement was palpable. Children pressed against the barriers hoping to catch a glimpse of the princess. Parents held up phones to record the historic moment, and elderly residents sat patiently in wheelchairs, many wearing their finest clothes for the royal visit. Detective Inspector Chen joined him near the main entrance. The crowd is enthusiastic but well-behaved so far. Local police report no incidents and the barriers are holding well. Good, Michael replied, but he was watching the crowd dynamics carefully. The people closest to the barriers were the most excited, and he could see the pressure building as more people continued to arrive. What's the current count? Just over 3,500, and still growing. Building management estimates they can safely accommodate up to 4,500, so we're still within acceptable limits. Michael wasn't entirely convinced. The engineering capacity of a building and the practical reality of crowd control were two different things, but his job wasn't to cancel events. It was to make them work safely. The princess's arrival went smoothly. She was greeted by local officials, posed for photographs with dignitaries, and began the ceremonial aspects of the opening. Michael positioned himself about 10 feet behind and to her right, a position that gave him good visibility of both the princess and the surrounding crowd. For the first 30 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as planned. Catherine moved through the ceremony with her characteristic grace, engaging warmly with local business owners, listening attentively to presentations about economic development initiatives, and clearly enjoying the enthusiastic reception from the crowd. But Michael began to notice subtle changes in crowd behavior. The people nearest the barriers were becoming more animated, calling out to the princess more frequently and pressing forward slightly. The noise level was gradually increasing, and he could see signs of restlessness in the areas where people had been waiting the longest. "Sarah," he said quietly into his radio, "are you seeing any pressure points developing in the crowd?" Some increased enthusiasm near Barrier 3, but nothing concerning yet. Local police are monitoring closely. Michael trusted Sarah's judgment, but his own instincts were becoming more alert. 20 years of police work had taught him to recognize the subtle signs that preceded crowd control problems, and he was seeing several of them developing simultaneously. The trouble began innocuously enough. A small child near the front barrier started crying, overwhelmed by the noise and excitement. Her mother tried to comfort her, but the child's distress caused people nearby to shift positions, trying to give the family more space. The movement was minor and well-intentioned, but it created a small ripple effect that traveled through the tightly packed crowd. Michael watched the ripple carefully. In most situations, such minor movements dissipated quickly. But this crowd was packed more tightly than optimal, and the excitement level was high. Instead of dissipating, the movement seemed to spread, causing people throughout the area to readjust their positions. "Control, this is Harrison. I'm seeing some crowd movement near the ceremonial area. Nothing critical yet, but we should be prepared for possible issues." The response came immediately. "Copy that, Harrison. Local teams are aware and standing by." Catherine had noticed the disturbance as well, and true to her character, she was trying to help calm the situation. She moved toward the crying child, kneeling down to offer comfort and taking the pressure off the immediate area. It was exactly the kind of gesture that made her beloved by the public, but it also meant she was now positioned closer to the crowd than originally planned. Michael adjusted his position accordingly, moving closer to maintain his protective stance while allowing the princess to interact naturally with the public. He could see other protection officers making similar adjustments, maintaining their security perimeter while adapting to the changing dynamics. For a moment, it seemed like Catherine's intervention had worked. The child stopped crying. The crowd settled slightly and the ceremonial proceedings continued. But Michael's unease was growing stronger. The crowd was still arriving, still pressing forward, and the available space was becoming increasingly constrained. He made a decision that would later be praised by security experts. Instead of waiting for the situation to potentially worsen, Michael quietly signaled to his team to prepare for an early transition to the next phase of the visit. If they could move the princess to a different area of the shopping center, it might relieve some of the pressure that was building. But before his team could implement the adjustment, something unexpected happened that changed everything. A group of teenagers near the back of the crowd, unable to see over the adults in front of them, decided to climb onto a nearby planter to get a better view of the princess. The planter wasn't designed to support multiple people, and when it began to tip under their weight, the teenagers jumped down into the crowd to avoid falling. Their sudden movement created a much larger ripple effect, causing people throughout that section of the crowd to stumble and push against those in front of them. Michael saw it happening in what seemed like slow motion. The wave of movement was traveling directly toward the area where Catherine was still interacting with the crowd, and there was no time to move her to safety through normal procedures. In that split second, Michael made a calculation that would define the rest of his career. The crowd surge was going to reach the princess in approximately 3 seconds. The standard protocol would be to immediately extract her from the area, but the crowd density made that impossible. The only option was to position himself between Catherine and the incoming surge, using his body as a human barrier to absorb the impact. He didn't think about the personal risk, didn't consider the potential consequences, and didn't hesitate for even a moment. Michael Harrison simply did what he had trained his entire career to do: protect the person under his care, regardless of the cost to himself. Time seemed to slow to an impossible crawl as Michael Harrison processed what was about to happen. The wave of people stumbling forward from the collapsed planter was creating a domino effect through the tightly packed crowd. Bodies pressed against bodies, feet lost their footing on the polished shopping center floor, and what had been an organized, enthusiastic gathering was rapidly becoming something far more dangerous. Michael's training kicked in with crystalline clarity. He had approximately 2.5 seconds before the surge reached Princess Catherine, who was still kneeling beside the little girl who had been crying, completely unaware of the approaching chaos behind her. The crowd barriers that had been containing the enthusiastic royal fans were now becoming potential crushing points as people were pushed against them with increasing force. Control! We have a crowd surge developing. Repeat, crowd surge in progress. Michael barked into his radio as he simultaneously launched himself toward Catherine. His voice cut through the growing noise of confused and frightened voices, but he knew that by the time help could reach them, it would be too late. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen, positioned 15 feet to Michael's left, saw what was happening at the same moment. She began moving toward the princess from her angle, but Michael was closer and moving faster. Other protection officers throughout the shopping center were responding to his radio call, but they were scattered across the venue according to the original security plan, which had never anticipated a crowd surge in this specific location. Catherine looked up from the child she had been comforting, her natural instincts telling her something was wrong even before she could see what was happening. She had developed good situational awareness during her years as a royal, learning to read the subtle changes in atmosphere that often preceded problems at public events. "Your Royal Highness, move toward me, now," Michael called out as he closed the final few feet between them. But there wasn't time for Catherine to stand up and move to safety. The surge was moving too fast, and the space around them was too constrained. Michael made his choice in the split second before impact. Instead of trying to pull Catherine away from the danger which would have left both of them vulnerable and potentially caused her to fall, he positioned himself directly between her and the approaching wall of human bodies. He braced his feet against the shopping center's marble floor, lowered his shoulder, and prepared to absorb the full force of what was coming. The first wave of the crowd surge hit Michael like a physical wall. The impact drove him backward, but he held his position, using his body as a human shock absorber to protect the princess behind him. People weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were simply being pushed forward by forces beyond their control, caught in a dangerous situation that had developed faster than anyone could prevent. Michael felt ribs crack as the pressure increased. His back was pressed against Catherine, shielding her from the worst of the impact, while his chest and shoulders absorbed the crushing weight of people who couldn't stop their forward momentum. The noise was deafening now, a mixture of frightened screams, confused shouts, and the sound of barriers being pushed beyond their limits. "Stay down, Your Royal Highness. Stay down and don't try to stand," Michael managed to shout over the chaos. His voice was strained from the pressure on his chest, but his words were clear enough for Catherine to understand. She had the presence of mind to remain in her kneeling position, making herself as small as possible, while Michael created a protective barrier above her. The shopping center's security team was scrambling to respond, but crowd surges are among the most dangerous and unpredictable emergencies that can occur at public events. Unlike fires or other disasters where people can be directed toward exits, crowd surges create their own chaotic momentum that can't be easily stopped once they begin. Sarah Chen had managed to reach them and was now helping Michael maintain the protective barrier around Catherine. Together, they formed a human wall that prevented the princess from being crushed or trampled as wave after wave of displaced people continued to push through the area. "Medical teams are en route," Sarah shouted to Michael. "How are you holding up?" Michael couldn't answer immediately. He was using every ounce of his strength to maintain his position as people continued to press against him. Some were trying to help, realizing what was happening and attempting to create space, but others were still being pushed forward by the momentum of the crowd behind them. The local police officers who had been managing crowd control were working desperately to create relief channels, opening additional barrier sections to allow people to spread out and reduce the pressure in the critical area. But their efforts would take time to have effect, and Michael needed to hold his position until the immediate danger passed. Catherine, protected by Michael's body but fully aware of what was happening, showed remarkable composure under the circumstances. Instead of panicking or trying to escape, she focused on helping in the only way she could. She spoke calmly to the people immediately around them, using her voice and presence to help reduce panic in their immediate vicinity. "Everyone, please try to stay calm," she said in a clear, steady voice that somehow carried through the chaos. "The police are working to help everyone move safely. Please don't push. Just try to stay where you are for a moment." Her words had an almost magical effect on the people who could hear her. Realizing they were in the presence of the princess, and seeing that she was remaining calm despite the dangerous situation, many people began to stop pushing and instead focus on helping create space for those around them. Michael felt the pressure against his back begin to ease slightly as people near them responded to Catherine's calm directions. But he also felt something warm running down his side, and he realized that one of his broken ribs had likely punctured something internal. The pain was becoming intense, but he forced himself to maintain his protective position. "Michael, you're hurt," Catherine said quietly, noticing blood on his shirt. "How badly?" "I'm fine, Your Royal Highness. Just stay down until we get the all clear." But Michael knew he wasn't fine. The pain in his side was becoming sharper with each breath, and he could feel his strength beginning to ebb. However, the crowd surge was still ongoing, and moving from his position could put Catherine in danger again. Emergency medical teams were now fighting their way through the confused crowd, directed by Sarah Chen and other protection officers who were coordinating the response. The shopping center's public address system crackled to life as the management began making announcements asking people to move slowly toward designated exit areas. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some crowding near the ceremonial area. For everyone's safety, we ask that you please move calmly toward the exits marked by our staff. Emergency services are on scene and everyone is safe." The announcement helped reduce panic, but the physical reality of moving thousands of people safely out of the shopping center was still a complex operation that would take time. Michael needed to maintain his protective position until Catherine could be safely evacuated, regardless of his own condition. Detective Inspector Chen had established radio contact with the command center and was coordinating with multiple emergency response teams. "We need a clear evacuation route for the principal," she said, using the code name for Catherine. "Medical assessment needed for primary protection officer. Possible internal injuries." Michael caught enough of the radio conversation to understand that evacuation plans were being implemented, but he also heard the concern in Sarah's voice when she mentioned his injuries. He knew his condition was probably worse than he was admitting, but his only focus was maintaining protection until Catherine was safe. The crowd dynamics finally began to improve as additional police officers created multiple pressure relief points throughout the shopping center. People were able to spread out more, reducing the crushing force that had been building in the ceremonial area. Emergency medical teams reached their position and immediately began assessing both Michael and Catherine. "I'm not injured," Catherine told the paramedics firmly. "Please focus on Detective Harrison. He's been protecting me and he's hurt." Michael tried to wave off medical attention, insisting that Catherine's safety took priority, but he was overruled by both the princess herself and the senior paramedic on scene. "Sir, you need immediate medical evaluation. We can protect the princess while you receive treatment." As additional protection officers established a secure perimeter around Catherine, Michael finally allowed himself to step back from his human shield position. The moment he relaxed his defensive stance, the full impact of his injuries hit him. Pain shot through his side. His breathing became labored, and he had to lean against a nearby pillar to stay upright. "Get him to hospital immediately," Catherine ordered the medical team, her royal authority cutting through any remaining debate about priorities. "And I want to be kept informed about his condition." Michael wanted to protest, to insist that his job was to stay with Catherine until she was safely away from the scene, but his body was no longer responding to his determination. As the paramedics helped him onto a stretcher, his last clear memory was of Catherine reaching out to touch his hand. "Thank you, Michael," she said quietly, and he could see tears in her eyes. "Thank you for keeping me safe." As he was wheeled toward the ambulance, Michael could hear the continuing sounds of crowd management and emergency response. His team was implementing evacuation procedures, getting Catherine safely away from the shopping center and back to the security of her official vehicle. The crisis was being resolved, and most importantly, the princess was unharmed. But Michael Harrison, the man who had become a human shield to protect the future Queen of England, was fighting a very different battle as the ambulance raced toward Leeds General Hospital. The emergency room at Leeds General Hospital had seen its share of dramatic arrivals, but the sight of police motorcycles escorting an ambulance carrying a royal protection officer was something entirely new for the medical staff. Elizabeth Morrison, the senior emergency physician on duty, had received only the briefest details. Serious chest injuries sustained while protecting a member of the royal family during a crowd incident. Michael Harrison drifted in and out of consciousness during the ambulance ride, aware of the paramedics working around him, but unable to focus on their words. The pain in his side had evolved from sharp stabbing sensations to a deeper, more concerning ache that seemed to spread with each breath. His training had taught him enough about anatomy to recognize that his condition was serious, possibly life-threatening. Patient is a 38-year-old male sustained blunt force trauma to the chest and abdomen during a crowd control incident. The lead paramedic reported to Dr. Morrison as they transferred Michael from the ambulance stretcher to the hospital gurney. Multiple rib fractures visible on initial assessment, possible internal bleeding, blood pressure dropping steadily during transport. Dr. Morrison's experienced eyes took in Michael's condition immediately. His skin was pale and clammy, clear signs of shock, and his breathing was shallow and labored. "Get him to Trauma Bay 2 immediately and call for the surgical team. This looks like a potential pneumothorax with internal bleeding." As the medical team worked around him, Michael's thoughts kept returning to Catherine. Had the evacuation been completed successfully? Was she safely away from the shopping center? He tried to ask the doctors, but his voice came out as barely a whisper, lost in the controlled chaos of emergency medical care. Meanwhile, back at the shopping center, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen was coordinating the final stages of the evacuation, while simultaneously fielding calls from senior officials who were demanding immediate updates on both the incident and Michael's condition. The princess had been safely transported back to London, but not before insisting that she be kept informed about Michael's medical status. The crowd surge lasted approximately 4 minutes from initiation to full control, Sarah reported to Chief Inspector Morton over the phone. "We estimate that between 40 and 50 people sustained minor injuries, mostly cuts and bruises from being pressed against barriers. Emergency services treated everyone on scene, and only 3 people required hospital transport for more serious injuries." What about Harrison's condition? Last update from the hospital was that he's in surgery. The initial assessment suggested internal bleeding and possible lung puncture from broken ribs. The doctors said his actions likely prevented what could have been a catastrophic incident. The full scope of what Michael had prevented was becoming clear as investigators reviewed security camera footage from the shopping center. The crowd surge had been moving directly toward the area where Catherine was interacting with children and families. Without Michael's intervention, the princess would have been caught in the middle of a crushing crowd with no protection and no escape route. Chief Inspector Morton was reviewing the same footage from his office at Scotland Yard, and what he saw reinforced his belief that Michael Harrison represented the very best of royal protection officers. The decision to use himself as a human barrier had been instantaneous, selfless, and potentially life-saving for the princess. But Morton was also deeply concerned about the broader implications of the incident. Crowd control at royal events would need to be reassessed, and new protocols might need to be developed to prevent similar situations in the future. The shopping center incident had revealed gaps in existing procedures that could have had tragic consequences if not for one officer's extraordinary courage. At Leeds General Hospital, Michael's surgery was entering its third hour. Dr. Ben Solber, Morrison and her surgical team were working to repair damage to his spleen and lung while stabilizing his overall condition. The injuries were consistent with someone who had absorbed tremendous blunt force impact, and the fact that Michael had remained conscious and effective for several minutes after being injured spoke to both his physical conditioning and his extraordinary determination. The spleen damage is extensive, Dr. Morrison reported to her colleagues. We're going to need to remove it entirely. The lung puncture is repairable, but there's significant tissue trauma from the broken ribs. The surgical team worked with the precision and focus that marked the best emergency medicine, but they were all aware that their patient's condition remained critical. Michael had lost a significant amount of blood, and his body was struggling to cope with the trauma he had endured. In London, Catherine was pacing the private sitting room at Kensington Palace, waiting for updates on Michael's condition. She had wanted to go directly to Leeds to be at the hospital, but her security team had reasonably pointed out that such a visit would create additional complications for medical staff and potentially compromise Michael's care. Instead, she had instructed her private secretary to maintain constant contact with the hospital and to ensure that Michael received the absolute best possible medical care. She had also begun working on a personal letter to Michael's family, though she wasn't sure what words could adequately express her gratitude for what he had done. "Your Royal Highness," her private secretary James Pemberton said as he entered the sitting room with an update, "I've just spoken with Dr. Morrison at Leeds General. The surgery is proceeding well, but Mr. Harrison's condition remains serious. They expect to have more definitive information in the next hour or two." Catherine nodded, but her worry was evident. "Have his family been notified? Does he have a wife, children?" "He's unmarried, but his parents and sister have been contacted and are traveling to Leeds. The hospital has arranged for them to have private accommodations so they can be close to him during his recovery." The princess appreciated the efficiency with which her staff had arranged support for Michael's family, but she was struggling with feelings of guilt and responsibility. Michael had been injured because he had protected her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there must have been something she could have done differently to prevent the situation. Prince William found her in the sitting room as evening approached, and he immediately recognized the signs of his wife's distress. "The doctors say he's going to recover," he said gently, sitting beside her on the sofa. "What he did was extraordinary, and he did it because he's exactly the kind of officer we want protecting our family." "But he almost died, William. He actually used his body as a shield to protect me. How do I live with knowing that someone was willing to sacrifice their life for mine?" William understood his wife's struggle because he had grappled with similar feelings during his own military service and royal duties. "The same way every member of our family has had to learn to live with it. We honor their sacrifice by being worthy of it, by using our positions to serve others, and by never taking their dedication for granted." Back in Leeds, Michael's surgery was finally completed as midnight approached. Dr. Morrison emerged from the operating room exhausted but cautiously optimistic. The surgical repairs had been successful, and while Michael's recovery would be long and challenging, there was every reason to believe he would make a full recovery. "The next 24 hours will be critical," she explained to Michael's parents, who had arrived at the hospital several hours earlier. "But your son is strong, and he's responding well to treatment. What he did today was incredibly brave, and I want you to know that everyone here is committed to giving him the best possible care." Michael's father, a quiet man who had worked in factories his entire life, struggled to process what his son had done. The idea that his boy had protected the future Queen of England seemed almost impossible to believe. "He always wanted to help people," he said quietly to his wife. "Even as a child, he was always trying to take care of everyone else." The story of Michael's heroic actions was already spreading beyond the immediate circle of people who had witnessed it. News organizations were requesting interviews, social media was buzzing with accounts from people who had been at the shopping center, and royal correspondents were working to piece together the full story of what had happened. But in the quiet hospital room where Michael lay unconscious, connected to machines monitoring his vital signs, none of the outside attention mattered. What mattered was the gradual improvement in his condition, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat on the monitors, and the slow process of healing that would eventually allow him to return to the work he loved. When Michael finally regained consciousness 48 hours after the incident, his first words were characteristic of the man who had risked everything to protect the princess. "Is Her Royal Highness safe?" The nurse, who was monitoring his vital signs, smiled and nodded. "She's perfectly safe, Mr. Harrison, and she's been calling for updates on your condition every few hours since your surgery." Michael closed his eyes and allowed himself to relax for the first time since the crowd surge began. He had done his job, fulfilled his oath, and protected the person he had sworn to serve. The pain in his chest was still intense. His recovery would be long and difficult, but none of that mattered compared to the knowledge that Catherine was safe and unharmed. In the days that followed, Michael would learn about the investigation into the incident, the changes being implemented to improve crowd control at royal events, and the recognition he would receive for his actions. But for now, in the quiet of his hospital room, he was simply a police officer who had done what he believed was right. 3 weeks after the incident at Trinity Shopping Center, Michael Harrison was finally well enough to receive visitors outside his immediate family. The private room at Leeds General Hospital had been transformed into something resembling a florist's shop, filled with flower arrangements, cards, and gifts from well-wishers around the world who had learned about his heroic actions through media coverage. His recovery had been slower than initially hoped. The removal of his spleen meant his immune system would be permanently compromised, requiring ongoing medical management for the rest of his life. The damage to his lung had healed well, but his breathing capacity would likely never return to its previous level. Most significantly for his career, the doctors had made it clear that his days of active protection duty were over. Michael was reading one of the hundreds of letters he had received when his nurse knocked on the door. "Mr. Harrison, you have a very special visitor today. Are you feeling up to receiving guests?" Before Michael could answer, Catherine appeared in the doorway, accompanied by a single protection officer and carrying a simple bouquet of flowers. She had insisted on making the visit despite the security complications it created, and her staff had eventually agreed to arrange a private, unannounced visit to the hospital. "Your Royal Highness," Michael said, struggling to sit up straighter in his hospital bed, "you didn't need to come all this way." "Yes, I did," Catherine replied firmly, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I needed to see for myself that you're recovering, and I needed to thank you properly for what you did." The room fell quiet for a moment as both of them processed the enormity of what had happened. Michael had literally put his body between Catherine and a potentially fatal crowd surge, absorbing injuries that could have killed him. Catherine had been saved from what could have been a tragic accident that might have changed the course of British history. "I was just doing my job, Your Royal Highness. Any officer on my team would have done the same thing." Catherine shook her head. "No, Michael, that's not true. What you did went far beyond duty or training. You made a split-second decision to risk your life for mine, and you did it without hesitation. That's not just professional dedication. That's extraordinary courage." Michael was uncomfortable with being praised for actions that felt natural and necessary to him. "The important thing is that you weren't hurt. Everything else is just details." "The details matter, Michael. Your injuries, your recovery, your future, they all matter very much. Which is why I wanted to discuss something with you." Catherine reached into her handbag and withdrew an official-looking document with the royal seal. "The Queen has approved a recommendation for you to receive the Royal Victorian Order for exceptional service to the Crown. It's one of the highest honors that can be bestowed for personal service to the monarchy." Michael stared at the document, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the recognition. The Royal Victorian Order was personally awarded by the monarch and was reserved for individuals who had provided extraordinary service to the royal family. Recipients became part of an exclusive group that included some of the most distinguished servants of the crown throughout British history. "Your Royal Highness, I'm honored, but I really don't deserve such recognition." "I was just doing what any protection officer would do." "Michael," Catherine said gently, "you need to understand something. In my years as a member of this family, I've worked with dozens of protection officers. They're all dedicated, professional, and committed to their duties. But what you did that day went beyond anything that could reasonably be expected. You literally became a human shield, and you did it knowing you might be seriously injured or killed." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door, and Chief Inspector Morton entered the room. He had coordinated Catherine's visit and was present to discuss Michael's future with the Royal Protection Unit. "Detective Harrison," Morton said formally. "I hope you're feeling better. I wanted to personally update you on the investigation into the shopping center incident and discuss your future assignments." Michael appreciated the straightforward approach. "Thank you, sir. I assume my active protection duties are finished, given my medical restrictions." "That's correct. The medical board has determined that your injuries prevent you from continuing in active protection roles. However, we have no intention of losing someone with your experience and instincts." Morton handed Michael another document, this one outlining a new position that had been created specifically for him. "We're offering you a role as Senior Threat Assessment Coordinator for the Royal Protection Unit. You would be responsible for analyzing potential security risks, developing new crowd control protocols, and training other officers in threat recognition." The position was effectively a promotion, carrying increased responsibility and higher pay, but it would keep Michael behind a desk rather than in the field. For someone who had dedicated his career to hands-on protection work, the transition would be psychologically challenging, as well as professionally significant. The role would be based at Scotland Yard, Morton continued, but it would also involve travel to assess security arrangements for major royal events. "Your experience from the shopping center incident has already informed new protocols that will be implemented across all future engagements." Catherine had been listening to the discussion with obvious interest. "Michael, I hope you'll consider accepting the position. Your insights into crowd dynamics and threat assessment could help prevent other incidents like the one you experienced. You could potentially save many lives through this work." Michael realized that both Catherine and Morton were offering him a way to continue serving the royal family and the crown, while acknowledging the reality of his physical limitations. The new position would allow him to use his experience constructively while ensuring that his sacrifice at the shopping center led to improved safety for future royal events. "I would be honored to accept the position, sir. Though I have to admit, I'll miss the direct protection work." "We understand that," Morton replied. "But your career is far from over. In fact, this incident has demonstrated that you have capabilities that extend well beyond individual protection duties. Your threat assessment skills and crisis management abilities are exactly what we need to improve our overall security posture." Over the following months, Michael's transition to his new role proved both challenging and rewarding. Working from an office at Scotland Yard, he analyzed thousands of hours of security footage from royal events, identifying patterns and potential risk factors that had previously gone unnoticed. His first-hand experience with crowd surges gave him unique insights into crowd dynamics that proved invaluable for developing new safety protocols. One of his first major projects was redesigning crowd management procedures for indoor royal events. Using computer modeling and analysis of historical incidents, Michael and his team developed new guidelines for crowd density, barrier placement, and emergency evacuation procedures that were subsequently adopted across all royal venues. Catherine made a point of staying informed about Michael's work and occasionally consulting with him on security arrangements for her own engagements. Their professional relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and trust, with Catherine often seeking Michael's input on events that presented unusual security challenges. A year after the shopping center incident, Michael was invited to attend a private reception at Buckingham Palace to recognize members of the royal household who had provided exceptional service during the previous year. As he stood in the elegant stateroom wearing his new Royal Victorian Order medal, Michael reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that March day in Leeds. "You look very distinguished," Catherine said, approaching him during a quiet moment in the reception. "How are you finding the new role?" "Challenging but rewarding, Your Royal Highness. I think we're making real improvements in security procedures that will benefit not just the royal family but everyone who attends royal events." "I'm glad to hear that. You know, William and I often discuss how that day changed both our perspectives on security and service. Your actions reminded us that the people who protect us aren't just doing a job, they're making a commitment that could cost them everything." Michael was moved by her words but still somewhat uncomfortable with being singled out for actions that felt like natural responses to the situation. "I hope that other officers never face a similar situation, but if they do, I hope they'll respond as any professional should." "They will, Michael, because people like you set the standard for what professional service means. Your courage that day and your dedication to improving security procedures now represent the very best of public service." As the reception continued around them, Michael realized that his career had taken a path he never could have anticipated when he first joined the police force in Manchester years earlier. The injuries he had sustained protecting Catherine had ended one chapter of his service, but opened another that was potentially even more significant. His work in threat assessment was already influencing security procedures not just for the royal family, but for public events throughout Britain. The protocols he was developing would protect countless people who would never know his name or understand how his sacrifice had contributed to their safety. Standing in Buckingham Palace wearing the medal that recognized his extraordinary service, Michael Harrison understood that becoming a human shield to protect the Princess of Wales had been both the end of his active protection career and the beginning of something larger. His willingness to risk everything for duty had not only saved Catherine that day, it had positioned him to save many more people in the years to come through his work improving security for everyone. The young police officer from Manchester who had dreamed of helping people in his community had found a way to help people throughout his country, and his legacy would continue long after his name was forgotten by the general public. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism are not the dramatic moments that capture headlines, but the quiet, dedicated work that follows, ensuring that such dramatic moments are never necessary again.